I don't think I'd be here without psychedelic medicine. I feel like I was at a place in my life, the way it had been set up with suppressed memories that I couldn't reach of a violent act that I couldn't confirm. There was so much pain that I couldn't access, but I could feel constantly.
Ooh. That
To be
resonates.
able to meet myself fully in those places that had been exiled, I don't think there are words to express how profound that is and how necessary it is to be a whole person. Otherwise, one is stuck. I was stuck living on top of something that was screaming on the inside.
Welcome to the Worth the Fight podcast, where we bring you powerful conversations surrounding the sensible and therapeutic use of psychedelics and plant medicines towards healing trauma. I'll introduce you to guests who, through their own personal journey and transformation, tell the Worth the Fight story. I'm your host, Matt Simpson, author of Worth the Fight, Acting for a Better World, a guide to spirituality, psychedelic medicines, and overcoming trauma. Thank you for listening. Hello, everyone. Here we are, Worth the Fight podcast number 28. My next guest is Hayden Bowen. Hayden is a beautiful human being. I had the privilege and pleasure to have met back in 2016. We had a serendipitous connection while I was in Guatemala at Lake Atitlan doing my yoga teacher training. Weeks after some of the deep healing work I did on my journey with ayahuasca in Costa Rica, when I'd set out and traveled our big, beautiful planet with nothing but a backpack for nearly 18 months. And Hayden she has a unique story, a very unique story, which, she says is off the bell curve. And it truly is. Her trauma, she had a horrific traumatic event as a 5-year-old that involved sex, drug, magic. And, she's done an immense amount of work on her journey to overcome and to reconcile that past hurt. And she has, in the process of doing her work, she's become extremely adept and keen as to what trauma is and what psychedelic medicines are and the potential in both. She's her understanding of the mechanism behind the psychedelic-assisted therapy is profound, and the spiritual insight that she's gained and gleaned on her journey is a true gift for our human family. We went a little bit longer than the targeted hour. We let the good times roll, and this felt like a very unique conversation to have, and one that we are deeply honored to be able to share with y'all. And we hit on trauma and psychedelics on the micro level, and ways to overcome and ways to lean in, and the value of integration. And we hit on the macro level as well, and what these misunderstood medicines and healing strategies mean for our human family during these trying times. We cover and hit the COVID-19 fear virus and ways that we can live healthy, happy, and strong lives during these times for ourselves, our loved ones, and circles of influence. And it was a lovely conversation that we are thrilled to share with y'all. So thank you so much for listening. Without further ado, I give you our conversation, the beautiful conversation I had with Hayden Bowen. Much love. Thanks so much for listening. Hayden, how have psychedelic medicines informed your path?
That's a huge question, because I don't think I know I wouldn't be where I am right now without psychedelics. That was a fundamental sort of moment in my life where my path opened in an entirely new direction. Let's see how I can answer it. So psychedelics, and in my case, primarily MDMA.
Is that MDMA-assisted psychotherapy?
Yes.
Yeah.
Yes.
Okay.
Yeah. I would say that psychedelics, and in particular MDMA, and its ability to open the door and allow me to feel such deep safety in my own being, has allowed me to live in a much bigger, more whole version of myself. So where I was, I think a large part of me was encapsulated in a trauma process. The MDMA and the experience of doing this kind of journey work allowed me to both meet myself in those places that had been walled off or inaccessible, really, and help integrate those places back into my being so that the things that were pressing in on me that were causing PTSD were allowed to unwind, be met, and dissolve. I mean, really, in some ways, I want to say, how's it affected me? I'm free. I got free. I could use a lot of words. I could, be really articulate, but wow, I'm free. And without that kind of therapy, I think I would still be tormented by things that I couldn't reach inside myself.
Yeah, and those things are repressed emotions. I know that we've talked about this in depth and on our pre-call, and we'll share more about how we've met throughout the call, and but yeah, I just want to just for the sake of our audience,
to give them some context.
Yeah.
So I had a really violent experience that's pretty off the bell curve when I was 5 that involved sex and drug magic. And I actually repressed that experience in its entirety, as much as one does. I now believe that disassociation isn't a free pass. It's still influencing you. It's just, it was in the unconscious. And so I did have a body memory when I was 19, which again, I'm happy to explain more, but I basically had an experience of memories erupting out of my consciousness or into consciousness when I was 19. That in itself was completely terrifying. But then it was about sort of beginning to, so what I think I'm learning in this already is, I don't think I'd be here without psychedelic medicine. I feel like I was at a place in my life, the way it had been set up with suppressed memories that I couldn't reach of a violent act that I couldn't confirm. There was so much pain that I couldn't access, but I could feel constantly.
Ooh. That resonates.
To be able to meet myself fully in those places that had been exiled, I don't think there are words to express how profound that is and how necessary it is to be a whole person. Otherwise, one is stuck. I was stuck living on top of something that was screaming on the inside. Psychedelic medicine let me actually meet and know what's been living in me and let me feel safe enough to meet it. So again, you direct me in terms of context and stuff and what is needed and what is most helpful for the audience.
Yeah, well, the idea that, and we talked a lot about this on the pre-call, the degree to which we understand and acknowledge and lean into our darkness is the very same degree to which we can stand and love and share our light. And so many of us are stuck in our traumas, and we can't access these. We feel like there's something there, but we can't get at it with the tools that we have available.
I think when we talked about this, it's like, well, the darkness itself, that's not what's scary. What's scary is the resistance that the animal body has put up so much resistance saying, don't go there. You can't bear that. That'll kill you. You'll die, whatever it is. So to be able to soften enough so that that resistance isn't there, so you can go and meet directly and have a direct experience with whatever has been withheld, held back, obfuscated, to meet the exiled parts of who we are and bring them home, that's sanity.
Wholeness, integration.
Absolutely. And to be on the other side of that where you can't reach it is insanity, is suffering, is illness, is
a third of our population
right now. Yeah, we just said the same thing.
Wow.
Yeah.
What was it that made you feel safe in getting to that point? I always say for me on my journey, the cage had to rattle enough where the fear of the uncertainty, it was far more dangerous to stay put than to go out into the unknown, than to dive into the abyss of the unknown, as Terence McKenna would say, only to realize it's just a featherbed.
I love that. That's fantastic. So I saw my husband do MDMA therapy. I actually wasn't there for the session, but I saw him afterwards. And I remember saying, I want to do what you just did. And there was no question in my mind. I didn't have a lot of experience with psychedelics. It's not something I would have naturally gone to, but there was something in my body, a felt sense that said, you need to do that.
And how old were you at this time, just for context? I think that's helpful.
How old was I when I did it?
Yeah.
I want to 38.
Okay.
So about 38.
Okay. So we were a little bit more, my first peak psychedelic experience, I was 33 years old. I was established in knowing reasonably who I was at this stage in my life. At 38 years old, you get an idea of what's going on.
Well, you do and you don't. I mean, I had done a lot of work, quote, work on myself. I had been on a fierce path since I was 19 when my memories came, actually 17. So I had been committed to what at the time I would have called a spiritual path. I wanted to remove all the obstacles that kept me from knowing God directly or the greater truth of who we are. I mean, something in me was pulling me forward. The longing for wholeness inside of me was huge. It was enormous. It's where all my resources went. I think some of that is because of the nature of my trauma. It was so severe and so steep. In order for me to find some semblance of wholeness, I had to find a way in. I mean, I think the longing to know truth, but the truth inside of me, I couldn't reach. I couldn't reach this part of myself.
You can't know truth when you're not being fully honest with yourself about our hurts.
Well, I want to say that the way that it was set up inside of me at 5 years old, however that exactly works, where the brain pushes aside and compartmentalizes a really difficult experience. I mean, in a way, it was like I knew I had to go towards that to become more whole, to have myself. But I'm also then pushing against my psychological immune system. I'm saying, hey, I need to know this thing that you walled off from me. So I think that was my internal battle. I want to know this. And then the minute I started to get into the resistance part of it or what was waiting for me there, I'd get terrified. So I think part of why the MDMA works so well, and you asked about the safety, is as we know, the flood of serotonin and that safety that's created, particularly with MDMA, allowed me to feel safe enough to have a conversation with myself, allowed me to go inside of my soma and discover what's always been there, allowed me to reach these tender places that just wanted to feel safe, that just wanted to feel met, that had been alone, you could argue, since I was 5 years old.
Wow.
That had not been able to complete whatever they needed to complete, that got halted, right? They talk about how with trauma, an animal needs to shake something off, right? It just shakes it off after it gets chased, and then it's over. So wherever that process got erupted in my system from such an egregiously violent experience, those places were waiting to just become fully expressed and then fully metabolized.
And the MDMA allowed you to feel safe, to go to that place in a safe setting, to be supported. For the audience, for our audience's sake, the MDMA, it reduces, and correct me if I'm wrong, the MDMA, it reduces the amygdala's fear response.
Right.
There's surges of oxytocin, bonding hormone, neurochemical, and dopamine, and so you're feeling safe, and you can go to that emotion of that traumatic memory of when you were just a precious little 5-year-old, and experience and process that in the safety of a room with a therapist or two, and a Buddha statue, and a some sort of fountain, and some light music or some Enya or whatever, and and you can feel that and process that and honor that emotion. And then
it's bigger than that. For me, my memories came back and I knew something really terrible had happened. So in my experience, when I had this body memory, I was driving in a car, I was 19, I was at a stoplight, I was in college, and I started screaming no at the top of my lungs. And I didn't know who was screaming. I looked around to see who was screaming. And it took me a minute to realize it was me. And I called my mother. I had to get home first. There weren't cell phones back then that we were all using, but I called my mother and I said, something terrible happened to me when I was little. And my mother, being the sage that she is, and the psychologist she used to be, really the awake person she is, said, listen to your body. It's trying to tell you something. She didn't say, oh, you had a perfect childhood. What are you talking about? She just said, listen, and we'll listen together. Part of what I'm learning in this conversation, and I'm just going to risk being more vulnerable rather than trying to have this perfect story that I can tell you, is I just want to acknowledge years later, I'm kind of just in awe of what I survived, of what it takes to live through such a violent experience like I did. And then what you're asking the animal body, the being in myself or another, to meet those places. And that this medicine, I don't know if we can do it without it. I mean, there are other ways you can do it, but like the safety is so important because it's like an animal primal instinct to say, don't go there. So I just want to touch on this. I think being able to integrate those places where literally the animal body thought, if I don't have the capacity to handle this, to find a way to handle it means that a future is possible that was never possible before. So sitting here with you today, I'm so touched by this, Matt. I want to acknowledge to anybody out there who's dealing with major trauma, whether that's some kind of, childhood sexual abuse, abandonment, war, our vets, anybody. I just really can feel in my heart right now the ask we make on anyone, the ask that anyone's making of themselves to really do this work. It's huge. Because what we're saying is, if you're willing to trust enough to meet yourself in these places that you thought you could not bear or survive, there is a doorway, there is a knitting together that is possible, that you can live on the other side of this completely in a fundamentally different way, where this is no longer the primary driver of how you exist and how you function in the world. That there is a benevolent universe waiting for you, that's been here the whole time, waiting for you to look around and realize that you're held, as you said, on the feather mattress, the feather bed. And it is from there you can look out at the world and begin to experience it and its kindness and all the ways it's waiting to meet you beyond the scope of the trauma filter. That's huge. That's a life's work.
And an invitation to anybody who's in it right now. And I just like to honor and applaud your bravery and courage for not only addressing it, which is a huge part, and taking that, I always say, taking that earnest first step in the direction of our dreams. That's all that's really required, that first step. But not only addressing it, but also addressing it and sharing and raising your hand saying, hey, this is important. That my shares, my being open, my being raw and vulnerable and real and authentic and transparent. Rick Doblin says that the most powerful weapon in our arsenal to destigmatize these psychedelic medicines is the power of personal story. And again, I'd like to just applaud you for that courage and bravery, for saying, hey, this is my truth, good, bad, and ugly. And
look, I was terrified for years. I thought there was something majorly wrong with me. And I had a hard time because of the nature of how it got built in my brain, right? Like I had a hard time believing my memories because there was very little on the outside to tell me this is what happened to you. And I think that happens a lot, you know, without the context. It wasn't like I had a mother and a father and childhood friends who could all say, hey, remember that time that happened to you? So it forced me to start to listen to my body and then understand what truth is in the body. And that was really frightening in a culture that was basically saying, yeah, how do you know that's true? Or, you know,
or move on with your life. Who cares?
Get over it.
Yeah.
It's over. And I'm like, wait a minute. And I wasn't, you know, I was sort of that classic case of failure to launch with all this potential, but I couldn't really function because I would move forward, but then this part of me couldn't move forward with me. Right? So you talked about that tension in the system. Like, when do you finally say, I need to do the work? Being in a situation that is immovable because it's really intractable PTSD, because so much of my attention kept being pulled back into this trauma, which I believe is actually an attempt towards wholeness. I said to you, I think in the pre-call, I feel like what trauma does is it takes a magnifying glass and it harnesses the energy of the sun, and it says, if the sun is our attention, and it just keeps bringing your attention back into that magnifying glass. And you're kind of going, okay, really, do I need to look at this again? Do I really have to look at this again? Do I really have to be with this again? Can't I put my focus over there? Why am I so scared? Why is everything, you know, I'm in fear, I'm in terror. Can't I just go be in sunshine over there? Or maybe that's not sunshine, that's a bad analogy, but can I just go have fun over there? I really honor the wisdom and the deep intelligence that says your attention has to go right on this spot until you burn through it. And psychedelics, to my mind, give us the kind of energy that allows us to burn fully through it all the way down. So there's nothing left. You don't have to then go work it for years and years and years and, you know, hope that you got it and then forget that you got it. And then in my case, it was like, before I did psychedelics, I have journals and journals and journals where I would write everything that happened to me. I'd write all the details, and then I would question it. It's like I couldn't hold the story in its fullness, in its wholeness. It would get broken and fragmented. I would do drawings of it. You know, I mean, I became an artist in part because I opened my pen up to my psyche, and suddenly I had all these drawings which were like the inner tableau, the Rorschach of my mind. So I have all this, quote, evidence that's just spilling out of me. And then part of me going, why is my attention only on this? Aren't there other things I want to do with my life? I don't really want to sit around looking at this all the time. And again, I think what the psychedelics did is say, hey, you're not alone looking at this. This may sound strange, but it was almost like, we've got you. We meaning my bigger self. We meaning God. We meaning essential space. I felt so held by the benevolent universe. And it was almost like life itself saying, we're going to hold your hand and take you through everything that happened. And you can know every single thing that happened to you. Why? Because it happened to you. And the body never forgets. And if you'll let us, by relaxing through this experience, we're going to show you everything you've been holding in a way that's safe enough that you can remember all of it. You can have your history. You can know what you lived. You can know what it was like for you. You can see kind of the bigger view. We can help you see it kind of from the 10,000 foot view, but we can also help you go right into the moment, you know, whatever moment you want to kind of zoom in on. To have my history, to know what I lived, that was one of the greatest healings of all. Rather than kind of having to bounce off of it because I couldn't quite hold it, to be able to take refuge in my body and all that I lived, and to know I was safe and to know I was whole enough to do that is completely transformational. Otherwise, I'm just disassociating, splitting off. It let me locate myself, if that makes sense.
Mm-hmm.
Like really, really locate myself in my body in this body that had that experience and many other experiences, so that at this point in my life, it's an experience I had. It's found its place in my history. It lives in my timeline, not in my present.
Beautiful, beautiful. Thank you again for sharing the mechanism of the healing. This is coming to mind for me. This is a fascinating notion that has helped me wrap my hands around trauma and MDMA-assisted psychotherapy and psychedelic medicine therapy, and just the nature of this work. The idea that when we're at this elevated state of vibration, we're high. Our body is saturated with all these feel-good neurochemicals. We got, oxytocin, we got dopamine, we got adrenaline, we got norepinephrine. All this goodness is online, and we recontextualize and reconsolidate our memories. There was a profound study in my mentor Akshay Nanavati's book Fearvana. He had mentioned I forget the PhD or the MD that referenced our memories as a Wikipedia page. And every time we go to the Wikipedia page, the emotion, basically we update that memory every time we access it. And the state in which, if we're in a high vibration, we alter that memory in a good way. There's a way that we can create space and distance from the trauma and the trigger, and we can look at it with compassion, and we can cry the tears, and we can just be. We can be, peaceful, non-reactive, and these really, high states of emotions. We can essentially replace that emotional memory with the work. And I know that you've done the work, and of course it's not, this path is not an easy path, and it's a path. What does the Buddha say? On the road to truth, there's only two paths. Only two mistakes: not starting and not going all the way. And
well, there you go. Yeah.
Once you're on the path, there's no turning back. And I'm a big believer that is incredible as these peak experiences are, and I'm sure that you'll attest to this, that it's not the peak experience. It's how are we integrating these into our these peak experiences into our day-to-day lives to be healthier, happier, and stronger for ourselves, our loved ones, and our circles of influence.
Well, that's beautifully put.
I've said that a few times.
I just want to take a moment.
Talking.
Yeah, but I want to take can I have some of that cacao? Yeah, but I want to just say, firstly, I just want to acknowledge again your path and the fierceness of your commitment to knowing not only that the work is important, but you just have the way your gaze is set upon the light at the end of the tunnel as well is really beautiful and rare.
Thank you.
So what's the question in that? Oh, Buddha?
No question. But a good segue. The time that we met, we met about 4 years ago. We'll get a little bit lighter here.
In Guatemala.
In Guatemala, I was on month 3 of my 18-month travel journey, and I just finished, or I was in the midst of my yoga training at Lake
You
Ativan.
were cracked wide open like an egg on Easter or something. Yeah, you were.
I just had 2 or 3 weeks worth of medicine work in Costa Rica the weeks prior, and I remember when we had met, I was in this conundrum of, oh shit, I have to share my psychedelic healing with my parents and also with the world. And it's like, I have to come out of the closet with this stuff, and it's time. And I had this beautiful post written, and I was like, totally struggling for a title. And you're like, dude, duh, lessons from the vine. Super easy for you. I was like, whoa, that's really good. Thank you. I can go back and do some more yoga.
I remember the earnestness of your just desire to share. It was profound. It was so pure. It still is, but it was like you were just so lit up by the greater truth. And I loved how you had put your business aside and you sort of just pushed this other life over, and you said, that's not right. That's not filling me up in the way that I know. So I think you're speaking of that thing, like, why do we do this work? Sure, it's to look at specific traumas or heal certain things. But if I'm honest, it's because we know we're more than how we're living. I mean, I have a specific trauma that I worked through, but I also had other places of resistance and contraction and egoic patterning, right? From just being a human being and a modern human being. I mean, we know, and look at where the world is right now with this pandemic. Like, we know, all of us intrinsically in our bones, where we're out of alignment, both in our own being and then I think as a broader culture and world, right? And so I think you just beautifully were out in front, right? As in your own way, as a pioneer, saying something's not right, and I think often it's that what an amazing thing to heed that call and say, I hear you. Like, it's in our cells, right? So I was thinking about this earlier, that the medicine isn't like, is it really the medicine? I mean, it is, but in my family, we've always talked about it, that especially with MDMA, it opens a door to who you are. It's the medicine's not doing the work. It just sort of opens you up enough, lets you feel safe enough to discover who you are. And so part of what's amazing for me is that doesn't mean I now have to take MDMA every day or every week or even every year. I think it helps us to begin to build new muscles of being that are, again, intrinsic to our human design. They're aligned with who we are. I mean, and I think that's a lot about where we are as a world right now, like, and what we've done with the planet. I mean, today's Earth Day.
Yesterday was Fungus Day, Fungi Day. So
right,
we got some good
right.
things going on. It's yes.
Yeah, and it's the 50th Earth Day today. I mean, I used to be an outward bound instructor, and I loved being out in nature because nature is such a great teacher and such an immediate teacher, but the rhythms of nature are so healing. And I feel like our world has been screaming to have a way of being as a world in relationship to one another and into relationship with the world and with the planet that's in alignment with the natural rhythms of the world, right?
Yeah, it's screaming loudly.
When I was 22, long before any psychedelics crossed my path, I did breath work. And I remember being on a mattress with 60 other people on mattresses, doing holotropic breathwork. And I'm sure I was quite a sight. I had pigtails and they were, kind of askew on my head midway through this process. I was doing all this energetic work with my hands, rapidly moving them. It felt like I was basket weaving. And there was all this screaming going on around me of these people moaning and crying and, going through their pain. And I heard the words, "This is the noise of the living." And this is the noise of the living. And it was this understanding I had of how out of alignment we were with the natural state. And I remember this sort of the quality of what came through me was this very kind of, it almost had the feeling of, I don't have the words, but like algae or spirulina, or like just like this deep, wet earth, green earth, saying, please pay attention, and that it's like I look at it now, it was like all that screaming. And I'm not saying people shouldn't suffer or that suffering isn't legitimate or real, but it's like how much of that is primary suffering and how much of it is secondary suffering and tertiary suffering, for where, again, we're just out of alignment with who we really are.
Powerful insights. Absolutely powerful insights. And I know that the breath work is a profound tool for peeling back layers and levels of consciousness. As
Yeah.
we've talked about on previous podcasts, there's far less, there's a very low risk profile with breath work. You just,
Well, there's very little body
Yeah.
load, right? It's your breath.
Mhm.
And it's amazing what you can experience. And if I have this right, I believe in part it was designed when psychedelics became illegal. So there was a way to continue doing this kind of work.
And it's a huge part of the psychedelic renaissance. It's a huge part. I've been talking a lot about Wim Hof, the Wim Hof method, and the
Absolutely.
Iceman, and it's a powerful breath. I mean, psychedelics, most of them are Schedule 1 drugs. That's a big deal. We have to, meet the world where the world's at, and we have these other tools and ways to elevate our states of consciousness and to still live healthy, happy, and strong lives. And without psychedelic medicines, hopefully.
But isn't it incredible that we can create within our being the same chemicals and same conditions, whether it's DMT or, some of the things that happen during breath work? I mean, I've seen.
It's remarkable. But it's hard. It's hard work. So that's what, I think that we still live in an instant oatmeal society where people want to take that pill. They want to have it, everything fixed, and they want to snap their fingers. And that's not how it works. The breath work is pretty brutal in an amazing way.
I'm laughing because I was thinking about how I can attest, at least personally, that I've been at this a while. I mean, I was 22 when I was doing breath work, and I'm 46 now, right? So it's like, but it isn't necessarily a quick and easy path. It isn't just a pill, but it's real, and it's, as to quote my friend Matt, it's worth the fight.
It is worth the fight.
Because who you get to be, how you get to experience the world is fundamentally different. Because I believe that so much of what happens with trauma is you're then living from a misinformed state.
Fight or flight. We're in fight or flight.
Right. And you're missing the whole show. You're missing the wonder. You're missing the opportunities. You're missing the ease of what's possible. I think a lot about how, whether it's our movies and films, narratives, stories, so much of how we understand the world is trauma-based. Even the whole, like, be the hero and overcome the thing, how much of that is based on trauma? I'm curious about a world where we as a whole are no longer operating from the ground of trauma. I think those are different stories, because there's no problem. There's nothing to overcome.
And I think that we're, a part of a movement that's retelling the story around trauma to pave way for that world to come forward. And, I've been giving a lot of thought to, with this new world order and the quarantine and lockdown, whatever you want to call it, this COVID-19 fear virus, a few, weeks back when this thing came on the scene, I was like, holy shit, the worth the fight mission and message of hope and healing just got really freaking relevant in terms of, my favorite author, Mark Manson, he wrote a lovely blog post the other day, talking about the pending mental health crisis. And I was like, oh shit, man, I thought we were already in a mental health crisis.
Yeah.
And, we're having a lot of our sociability, stripped from us, our health clubs, yoga studios, all of these different things that we're doing. A lot of people are taking this very seriously, and they're staying indoors, and bypassing walks and bypassing nature and bypassing these essential things that we need to keep.
But, and I said this on the pre-call with you too, I don't ever assume that the experience is the same for anybody, right? And that there are people who are really, really struggling in this. And then I feel very blessed that I'm mostly just staying home in LA, and I don't have a lot of hardship in that, so much as, I know some people, especially the people that are out on the front lines in hospitals and things right now, and people that are having to go out and work, and what that looks like in the outer world right now. But I've been thinking about it a lot too, that at some level, a large part of the world has stopped. You could call that on retreat. I don't mean that like go to a spa. I mean that like having to meet yourself directly without the outside world in the same way. I think that the collective egoic, the momentum of the collective ego was so great and so destructive. When this first started happening, I was thinking about how we needed something to stop that momentum enough, to halt it enough, that we had a chance to reassess individually and as a collective.
I love that.
What our collective ego, how it functions. Because it's been so destructive on so many levels, and we all know it. And it has so much disassociation and dislocation in it. So the opportunity to stop, to stand still, to sit with yourself. I mean, and let's not assume that sitting with yourself is easy. I feel very grateful for the years of silent meditation retreat and the things I was able to do, where I've had to meet myself again and again and again, through terror, through fear, also through bliss and good feelings. But I feel like there is a collective invitation to redesign and rewire what we're doing.
Love that. Yes. Yeah. I feel that strongly too. And, I'd mentioned the kind of going down the rabbit hole of negativity in terms of a pending mental health crisis, but there's the beautiful opportunities here too, that we do have things on pause. The idea that this is what I've been asking for the longest time, for us all to have our busyness stripped away from us, so we can all take an objective look at reality right now. And I think it's an even playing field for a game that I've been realizing, well, shit, I've been training for this for 6 years intensely. And this notion of anti-fragility, when and I think that people that have had their dark night of the soul, we can hold space for others that are going to be struggling during these times. And that goes to Ernest Becker's denial of death, and his, I think he won a Pulitzer Prize in 1973 for that. His position was that all of our neurosis is a fundamental denial of death, a denial of and in denying death, we deny life, paradoxically. And
Absolutely.
And now the death is removed from the back burner, because we, as humans, we think of everything in terms of ourself. So everything, death has moved from the back burner to the front burner for all of us, for our loved ones and ourselves. And obviously, we're healthier and more vital than people that might be at risk. But it's something that it's not on the far back burner now. It's like, all right, well, maybe
it's also in the collective. Like I at least from where I sit, I mean, you can feel it, right? Like you feel a shift, like it's in the morphogenic field. People are aware of dying in a different way. With the numbers, I think right now in this country are over 40,000, which that's 40,000 lives, right? And so it's that begins to be something that you can't turn away from, or not as easily. Ram Dass has this wonderful phrase, we're all just walking each other home. And I've always loved that. And these days I've been thinking about it like, we're all just walking each other home. Let's have as much fun doing it, together. Like this notion that it can be so different than how we've made it. It can be, how connected can we be? How loving can we be? How much fun can we have? And I don't mean fun in a split way, where like a spiritual bypassing way. I often think that people talk about doing the work like it has to be so hard and painful. And, I know in my own life, I spent years being deeply loyal to my suffering because I thought it was real. It was almost like, well, if it hurts and if it's painful and if it's difficult, clearly I'm doing something. And these days, I've really been looking at that, and something new's emerging where I'm also just having a really good time. It is fundamentally different to feel safe in my body. It's a different thing. Suffer any suffering itself just feels different. When you can rest in the greater truth of who you are, when you can rest in the place that's big enough where there's no problem, right? I had a teacher, Jason Schulman, who I adore, who used to talk about the light that has no opposite, the illuminating urge itself. And I see that as like how the leaves of a plant turn towards the sun. Like if we just follow that stream, if we just let ourselves keep opening. I don't know. These days, I'm less interested in the past and my stories and all the things that I held and all the things that I did. And, I'm much more interested in what's happening right now and what's emerging and what I want. See, trauma that's unhealed, I think, keeps you from having a kind of volition or choice to say, what do I want? Because it's directing everything.
Truth.
To step out of that prism completely, or even just mostly, and to start to look at the world, I don't know, through the heart, not through fear, not through unmets and unseens and all the things that, used to pull and tug, is a fundamentally different place to live from.
From that place, what do you see? What do you want?
It's a great question.
I know what I want.
What do you want?
Peace.
Get back to me.
Peace. I want our human family to come together in the next generation or two. And I want people to do their work. And I want to keep shifting the narrative around psychedelic medicines, around trauma, around what our war veterans mean to our collective, if indeed we do seek peace earnestly. Sorry, I stole the show there.
You didn't steal it. It's your show. It's okay. You didn't steal anything. More than I want, it's like I love. I am. Like I'm here. Like, so it's the wanting to, but then it's the realization I'm here. And from here, I can do what feels good. I can follow my impulse. I'm free to follow my heart. I'm free to show up here and have a conversation with you. Mm-hmm. I'm free to notice what's happening in the world. And I'm free to be with what's unfolding in the world, but not be consumed by it like a tsunami because it's got all my hackles up because I'm in fear. I love the world so much. I love the human journey so much. I love that we're having a more honest conversation about what it is to be human and how we navigate these spaces so that we can actually have a chance to be who we actually are. So much of the conversation on social media, in the world, is curated and truncated and flattened and constricted. I want everybody to have the chance to really be here. That's what I want. I want everybody to have the opportunity to know what it feels like to be completely safe in their body, to feel secure, to feel loved, to feel seen and known for who they actually are.
That's
to feel
abundance.
Understood.
That's abundance for our human family.
And this circles back to, but that is the benevolent universe that's always here. That is essential space that's always reaching out to us. I mean, one of the great teachings I received, really just through sitting, was this understanding that space itself is loving. And so when we hold our hand out, it's not like it's just in empty. I mean, it is in emptiness. Emptiness is space. Space is emptiness. I mean, but that space is alive, right? So just like when we touch a flower, when we touch space, that's what we're made of. So when you start to look around a room, like I'm in a big open room right now, when you start to look around a room and you realize that space itself, the thing that isn't filled in, is actually alive and brimming and shimmering, well, then we're never alone. You can't be dropped. You can't be abandoned by space. We're held in every moment. And maybe that's some of what the psychedelic work really showed me. I've never been alone. I've never been left. I've never been forgotten. I've always been loved. I've always been met. Fundamentally, exactly.
Fundamentally, we're loved. Yeah. Yeah. That's been my experience as well. And that's a deep, deep seated, rooted knowing that just won't go away.
Well, isn't that a blessing? Isn't that nice?
But isn't that sound like it's a bad thing?
But isn't that the teaching? Love won't go away.
It won't go away.
But that is what's here. Always.
So we keep showing up to greet it the best that we can in these bags of bones and
well, I'm gonna say, not only do you show up and greet it the best you can, because sure, but even that has a hint of forgetting in it. You are it. There's nothing to remember. There's nothing to meet in a certain way. We are the meeting.
Beautifully said.
Yeah.
So good. So good. So much wisdom here, Hayden. I knew that we were going to have a super fun conversation, and I've been looking forward to this for some time. You had said something on the pre-call that was really profound. And if you're up with going in this direction,
profound to say.
No, I mean, just profoundly novel for the show, I should say, because we haven't touched upon this aspect, and I love to keep giving our audience fodder,
sure,
of different ideas to test the idea. The notion of your mother's overcoming of Alzheimer's, and
well, you have it in it is my mother's. Parkinson's.
Parkinson's. Okay.
It's okay. I'd love to talk about it. I'd love to talk about her. Mom, I'm sorry. I'm going to have to talk about you for a minute.
I think that's a big deal. I mean, so many of our parents, struggle with, and I hate to package Alzheimer's and dementia and Parkinson's, but I guess maybe that's my ignorance.
Okay. That's okay. Let me talk for a minute. Let me riff on my mom for a minute. Before I go to the Parkinson's aspect, or disordered movement, as she would call it for a long time, I want to say that one of the greatest gifts my mother ever gave me, besides just saying to me to trust my body, is she, through her own living, demonstrated a profound relationship with the numinous. Her relationship with fundamental space and with the mystery is one of the most remarkable transmissions and
gifts, exposures
I've ever had. So my mother's longing for God and longing for wholeness was one of the primary companions of my life, of my childhood and my teenagehood. Watching her, I had the benefit of that, and I think to large measure who I've become is because of her demonstration and her willingness to be with the unknown. So when my mother was diagnosed with Parkinson's over a dozen years ago, her hand would shake and tremor, and she'd look at it and she'd say, instead of just resisting it, like, go away, I don't want to look at you, this is scary, this is for me, she'd say. This is for me. Like, it had a reason, it had a purpose, it had a message, it was part of her. So through somatic work, including MDMA, so she saw me do the work and she said, I want to do this, right? It's contagious that way. It's a good contagion. She began to unwind and unfold the unmet experiences within her body, not unlike what I did, but in her own way. And then the unmetabolized trauma and experiences from her early childhood and upbringing. What do I want to say about her? I think what's extraordinary is when she started, she had like I can say this, she had a gait issue, right? Like there's a way when she would walk, her gait, the audience can't see me right now, but it's like there was a stutter in her gait. And her best friend was a doctor who sort of said, hey, you should go see a neurologist about that, kind of recognized it as what looked like something that could be Parkinson's like. And my mother said something like, sure, but what are you talking about? This is my 2-year-old saying no to my governess. So my mother was raised by women, primarily other than her own mother. And one of them was this governess who, it's an understatement to say wasn't an easy woman. And so my mother could feel, had a felt sense in her body that the way she was walking, this stuttered kind of stumbly way, sure, maybe it was, you could look at it in her neurology and say this is Parkinson's, but she felt and had a knowing that it was her 2-year-old inside resisting being told what to do by her governess. That kind of specific mapping is the kind of experience that I certainly have had as well, in terms of the body is so literal, what it gives us, how it unfolds, how it holds things. And so she sort of just she pulled the thread and followed all of these different symptoms as they'd arise, and kept unwinding them, and then got to know herself and understand what she'd lived and what she'd had to hold outside of her known experience, right? That was stored in the body. Does that make sense?
Mm-hmm.
And so she's currently still on a very low dose of medication, but that's it. And doctors just sort of say, what are you doing? And now they're saying you have a very low grade form of Parkinson's, but her symptoms definitely got worse over the years, and then they got better. And it's extraordinary.
And your family attributes that to some psychedelic healing?
As part of it, absolutely.
Yeah. Okay.
Yeah, the MDMA, we talk in our family about when we started doing MDMA, and she started doing it around the time I did. It fundamentally changed our trajectory. Partly because she's my mom, and epigenetics and lineages, we started unwinding consciously as much as we could the suffering within our lineage. So my matrilinear line, right, which I had mentioned to you, looking at your American flag, is a lineage that had her father was an admiral in the Navy, and so were her grandfathers, and so we have a lot of tradition that way in terms of power and wartime and things. And it's been such a pleasure to have a parent to do this with. I cannot tell you
beautiful
how meaningful that is.
Sacred.
Because, especially because she was my primary caregiver. So all of the early imprinting I had was really from her. To be able to unwind that with her, I'll tell you a funny short story. One time I was on an MDMA journey, and I called her over, and I think I'm going to try to get this right. I gave her a blessing as the fetus from the past, like as the fetus that had been inside her. I gave her a blessing, like a healing from that place. I mean, first of all, if we can just call them drugs for a moment, doing drugs with your mother is something that neither of us ever planned on doing, right? There was no expectation that was going to be part of our future experience together, especially psychedelics, right?
I drank ayahuasca with my 71-year-old mother. So I can laugh and smile at it. And yeah.
But to be in that space with each other where you feel totally safe, and what truly is allowed to be present and allowed to be born. I mean, she once turned to me in a journey, and it's like she said, like, you're the best possible daughter I could have ever asked for.
Aww.
And I'm a truth sayer. Like, how do you know this is true? Right. This profound wisdom coming from the depths.
I am connected to source. Exactly, this is coming right through.
Exactly. And so we've been held in this larger container together. There's a whole nother conversation about how my marriage has been too. And so, but to be able to rest in the greater truth of who we are together, to watch my mother get better every year, to wake up more and more, to which I never ask her about Parkinson's anymore. I used to, and I'd say, how's your shaking? And she's like, it's not about the shaking. Because for her, it wasn't about the shaking, it was about the waking up. That's the point. And when she first was diagnosed, she said to me on the phone, I don't know what this is going to mean, but if it means, who am I to know where my true happiness comes from? And if my true happiness comes from sitting in a wheelchair, drooling, incapacitated, like, who am I to know what I have to go through to be free and to have myself and to have my heart? And so I think she had sort of a rare attitude from the beginning, which is just the nature of who she is.
That's a gift. That eternal optimism, meet the world where the world's at. Gift is
more than
compassion.
Optimism, I feel like it's some place within knowing that it's bigger and different than what's presenting, that there's something deeper, there's something truer. That I'm reminded again of Ram Dass when he had his stroke, like, or of Nelson Mandela in prison. Like, let's not assume that any external anything, one, can limit the potential for freedom, but two, might even be like trauma itself, be the vehicle through which we get free. When I look back on my childhood and I look back on this experience, which ultimately was just really a moment in time, but it has been the vehicle for my freedom. I don't know what my life would have been like without that, but it insisted that I pay attention to something deeper. And I think very often in this culture, we try to get rid of things and say, well, we don't need that, or get over it. Well, what if you don't have to get over it? What if it's actually there so you can get free? It just needs to be met. And so I've watched that with my mother again and again and again. And it's extraordinary. I call it her generative Parkinson's, because the symptoms have shifted over time and then they sort of disappear. So it almost, in a poetic way, it almost looks like different shapes arise out of the soma to be unwound, where resistance can then be let go of, where tension gets to soften, and then maybe another layer comes through. But she, like me, I think, is more and more in a space now of like, okay, so we did that for years. You could unwind forever, but what else is there? And so, she's obviously older than I am. So she had ingrained patterns that had more years to sort of solidify. And it's extraordinary, again, to see a parent who had deeply entrenched suffering be liberated and
Powerful,
live.
profound. That aligns with Michael Pollan's. He had mentioned a Carl Jung quote in his book, How to Change Your Mind. But Carl Jung had posited, whether he thought psychedelics potentially were lost on the young and were better suited for people negotiating the second half of their lives.
I don't have an answer for that, right? I do think we're all different. And it may be that in a culture that is able to face the cyclical nature of being alive, which includes death, younger people are better able, I don't mean than older people, but that they have a way of holding the whole of the journey. I mean, they say that in a way, death is necessary, right? To live. Meeting our darkness, you might say, is necessary to know our light.
Absolutely.
Our full light, because then it's the illuminating urge itself, because it's no longer fighting to keep certain things in the darkness. I think we're at an extraordinary moment in history for humanity. And I was going to say I pray, but I know in every cell, every day, that the natural alignment of who we are is always available, and that the invitation is very loud right now for, I think, each of us to come home, come into center, come into alignment, come into our hearts. And I think the more and more we do this work as a collective, the more it gives permission for other people to do it. Like the 100th monkey, right? It, like, how many people need to do this? And then we all kind of really know how to live within the heart and less up here, you know, in our head.
We shift the herd mentality as we wake up, and I'm extremely hopeful for that as well, and think that it's these conversations that are invitations to others to just explore their truth, and this is these medicines are powerful interventions that can connect people to those traumatic repressed memories, and can really catalyze some incredible transformational growth fast.
So if you think about the whole, the collective, because I think about it individually, if I hadn't found a way to meet myself all the way through, right? Like if I hadn't been able to really gain access the way I needed to, all of those voices, all of that energy that never got metabolized, that never got expression, would still be just throwing itself against my mind, right?
Making you sick. Yeah.
Making sick, scared, terrified,
in a lower vibration of fear and worry and doubt and insecurity. Yeah.
Yeah, I used to say that because of the nature of what happened to me, it was almost like because I couldn't reach the things that actually happened, I was scared of things that couldn't. You know, I was sort of, you're just kind of like scared all the time.
That's profound. Right? That's another one. It just landed. Yeah. No,
and because I was 5 when it happened, it was often very kind of astrally and like kind of just felt sense scared of the thing out of the corner of my eye. It was like almost like a children's book, right? Like I'm scared of that thing right over there. I don't believe anymore that we have to live in a world where we're all kind of, where that kind of fear has to be part of the human experience. And I have this wondering as we're talking, I don't know if I've articulated it like this before, but again, the macro and the micro, right? So if we can do this on the micro level as individuals, what's it like in a world where we don't have those kind of slaking, hungry ghosts pushing at in the recesses of the collective mind, but we've been able to meet who we are and meet all those places as a collective that we've exiled. That's a fundamentally different world. And I used to think it meant that we had to meet every single thing that had ever been exiled, every single thing that had ever been pushed aside. Like it was almost math, like an equation. I'm not sure that's true anymore. And again, I think that doing this kind of work and changing the collective narrative, whether it be through podcasts or television and movies or theater or music, whatever it is, but changing the narrative gives people a place to rest in a larger container. And isn't that what psychedelics do for us individually? It gives us a larger container within ourselves. It's like we step into a larger room.
Yeah.
And we're home there.
Absolutely. The our mutual friend, Janine,
yes.
the director
love
of
you, Janine.
From Shock to Awe. Love you, Janine. Worth the Fight podcast guest number 6. She said it, one consciousness at a time. And I mean, that's what we're doing. And like we talked about on the pre-call, if our conversation affects one person, then this hour and a half will have been worth our times. Yeah, that's what it's about, one at a time, and slowly shifting the narrative and the collective archetype or the collective container is shifting it. And to answer really what you're alluding to is that as we break down these, as I affectionately call in Worth the Fight, these bullshit incorporated limiting belief scarcity programs, as we break them down, there are people that are going to be able to heal in a far more efficient manner than the manner in which I've had to go through and the manner in which
Absolutely.
you've had to go through.
Well, I think it's exponential, and it's, I mean, again, to use an example,
Exponential. Love that word. Love
but
it.
but as like this virus, right? Like, if you look, we all start doing this work, and then I cannot tell you enough how much, I mean, I'm really getting it right now, how much we do the work and then other people have a place. So in Buddhism, there's this concept of pointing out. And so the job of the guru, the job of the teacher, let's say, is to point out territory so that their students have a felt sense of what that place is beyond what they've been able to conceptualize or experience before, right? So in some ways, what we're all doing as we're having conversations and giving new narratives for what's possible is we're giving a pointing out to the world saying, hey, it's bigger than this. Because what trauma does, in my experience, is it puts us in such a small little place and we think that's the whole world. And you're pushing up against it and it's terrifying and it's limiting. And to be able to sit in a larger space, the trauma doesn't have to be eradicated. I mean, it doesn't have to be denied. It doesn't have to be blacked out, or I don't know, but it can exist, but it exists within a larger whole. So to me, the invitation is, come rest more deeply in the back line of the body, like you do in meditation, and allow more space. And when there's more space allowed internally, the trauma becomes less significant, because it has room to be when everything's allowed and everything's allowed to be itself. To me, that's true healing. But when everything's allowed and everything's allowed to be itself, you've made room for the natural state and who we actually are. And when we're actually unfolded completely into that, we can meet reality as it is. And again, there's no problem. And the light of who we are, the illumination that just is the experience.
So much wisdom you've imparted on this call, and sharing vulnerably your experiences, sharing your perspectives on an individual and on the collective level, your deep spiritual insight and principles. And thank you. This has been wonderful to have this time with you. Is there parting words that you would give to somebody who might be stuck in trauma, and they might be in that state where they know that there's that thing to address? And I think we all have that, more or less. And with some have that emergency or that urgency more than others to address and confront our truth. And what words of wisdom might you offer to somebody that is in that state and possibly thinking about engaging these powerful psychedelic medicines or this holotropic breathwork or this Wim Hof or
Right.
or a cacao ceremony or something where they're going to start this healing journey?
It's a great question. I don't know what great wisdom I have, but the two things came to mind. One is find a person. And I was going to say, it doesn't even have to be someone you know or in person. It could be someone you listen to. But I would, if someone was in that situation, I would want them to have a voice that embodies a transmission that has more space than where they are right now. So someone that can really hold, reflect, you could call it mirror neurons, but gives them the larger view, someone that's been through it, so that one of the most powerful things we can do for another person is sit across from them when we've been through something, so that they know in their body, because we're so interconnected, that it's possible. So I would want to surround that person with individuals who had made the journey enough that they don't have to wonder if it's possible, but they can feel it. And then from that place, I'd say, while you're in your struggle, even if it's small things, finding something that gives them joy, something that feels good, something. It could be, I don't know, walking through a field and finding some dandelions. I mean, it doesn't have to be anything big. And to begin to develop a relationship with this sort of benevolent gaze that's always upon us, but that could be literally like out my window, noticing the breeze in a palm tree. So developing a relationship with the natural world, because that, in a way, the natural world has made the journey. The natural world is that same. So just, I think my big thing there is, whether it's in nature, whether it's listening to a mentor, even on a podcast, getting examples in a felt sense way of the possible future that's waiting for them, that's already blooming on the inside, that the seed's already there. And then dance. Just get in your body. Matt's smiling because he knows that that's a good one, but yeah. Feel yourself, feel your body, feel all of it. Make room for who you are, because the body is trustable. It's directing you. And may all the world know, I think what you asked me earlier, what I want the world to know how loved it is. I want everyone who's struggling to know that they're held and loved and not alone, and that we're all in this together, and we're becoming who we truly are together, and that there are thousands, millions of us, like, we're all doing this together. We're not doing this just for ourselves, not one single one of us. That's how we birth the new world. Person by person, consciousness by consciousness, but as one.
Beautifully, bravely, boldly, and eloquently said. Thank you for tying everything together and those parting words of wisdom. This has been Matt Simpson of the Worth the Fight podcast. Thank you so much for listening. You can learn more about our mission of hope and healing at worththefightbook.org. Please rate, review, and share this episode. Please help us expand our circle of influence and get these vital conversations out to our human family. Also, if you are in a financial position to support the show, you can help us push forward these conversations with monthly donations on Patreon. This podcast is a tremendous amount of work for me, and I have stellar guests in the queue. Please help if you can. Thank you for listening to this programming. Much love, y'all. Peace.